Today we have Dr. Mandeep. She is a global authority on values and a sought-after speaker and the best-selling author of The Values Compass, What 101 Countries Can Teach Us About Purpose, Life, and Leadership. With a background in journalism, international diplomacy, and finance, Dr. Rai has worked in over 150 countries, advising governments, businesses, and international organizations on how values can shape policies and drive leadership, and is renowned for her expertise in navigating global challenges through a value-based approach. Please welcome to the second annual Digital Power of Women Conference, Dr. Mandeep.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. As you know, why we are here today with the Digital Power of Women Conference is we want to increase the participation of female leaders in decision-making processes across all sectors. How can we utilize female leadership and incorporate values in this process?
Firstly, I'd like to praise some of the matriarchs or matriarchal societies in the world. You do see a difference in those societies. And you also see, I think there's a shift happening in the world right now. I think there's a real need for female leadership and female values. When I say female values, people ask me, well, what does that mean? Nurturing values or communicative values or community values are often led by women because they're naturally our strengths, but yet they weren't necessarily valued the same in society. But what we found, especially during COVID, for example, it was those leaders that had enough wherewithal to say, we're having this Zoom meeting with all my employees. Well, how are you doing? What else are you having to look after? Are you having to look after your sick parents? Oh, and you're also having to homeschool your children. Oh, and you're also having, just being aware of everything else that is going on for you. Those leaders that had that awareness or were caring enough to ask the questions or were caring enough to provide you the infrastructure so that you could juggle and manage, they're the leaders that are successful today, because it's not that our life stops now that COVID is slightly distant. It doesn't mean that we still don't have all the responsibilities that we had then. We still have them now. And we still need that flexibility or awareness or care or nurture. And so the leaders that are willing to adopt some of those, or because we're all masculine and feminine energy, it requires us to take those feminine values and secondly, to be able to bring them up as to be equally valuable as, say, the value of excellence or the value of something else that's a little bit more, and I don't think it's that excellence is more masculine and less feminine, but you get the point that our leadership needs to have a fair level and a symbiotic kind of relationship between both.
You wrote a book after traveling to 101 countries. And in this process, how did you see that reflected in even female leadership being represented in different countries? What was your experience with that and values and female leadership?
So much in that question. Okay, so the book is called The Values Compass, What 101 Countries Teach Us About Purpose, Life, and Leadership. And it actually began with a moment that I had where I was with the BBC World Service. So call it a roving reporter or a foreign correspondent. And I chose that my first country to report from should be India, because I'm ethnically Indian, I know the languages, I felt that this is somewhere I could really add value. And one of the stories that I immediately covered when I landed was the fact that the elections were happening and the government had this very laudable idea of having all the villages led 50-50 by men and women. So they have a scheme where they've decided that the leadership will be egalitarian and equal gender-wise. But the reality was that the girls or the women would not be able to perform in that leadership. Why? Because actually in these villages, there would be days that the woman or the girl would feel that she really couldn't come out, or indeed she felt ill. Why was she falling ill? Well, every time she'd have a period, she would feel too embarrassed. They wouldn't have disposable sanitary towels. Many people had washable sanitary towels. And after you wash, they wouldn't want to put that cloth to dry in the open air on a washing line. They would feel quite shy or embarrassed, and they would have it dry in maybe the cow shed or somewhere. And then flies would sit on it, and when it was used, they'd become ill. And so it used to be that they'd become ill every month, and then this illness would be prolonged. And so for something as simple as sanitary products was enough to mean that the government's policy of saying, look, we're going to make sure all our villages are 50-50, it couldn't actually happen because of this one point. Now, this is the point, I think, the reason that our world needs to be created by 50% of the population, whether it's your iPhone, which should be designed, by women also, or your seatbelt, which should be designed by, there are so many things that have been made with just men in mind, or often men in mind. And the handicap that we then face and the repercussions, it means that we couldn't even lead the village. We couldn't even be present, even when we were elected and voted in. So you can see that you can't just ignorantly put a target in place and yet not think, well, what do our women need to be included? When I'm in New Zealand and I look at this incredible prime minister that was running the country, and then why she had to step down, and why so often female leaders feel that they have to step down at a certain point, or indeed even the impact, we just talked about the impact of the menstrual cycle, the impact of menopause, how these 50-year-old women feel that they're not supported in any way. There is no support. And they get to a point where they even start to question themselves. Is it we that are going mad? And so my point is that our world, in order for it to really work, has to be designed by us to work for us. I hope that's answered your question.
Absolutely. Girls don't have the same opportunity when it comes to leadership. When it's a quota system at the top, they never had the opportunity to begin with, to have the same exposure to leadership skills. Or, like you said, the period is one of the biggest components that stands in between a girl and her confidence, her level of participation in her community. So even when we're thinking about values, Dr. Mandeep, and I mean, you have traveled to so many countries and you have seen so much. And one of the questions we want to find out is, how have you experienced the power of women through your travels? And if you have any examples or stories you want to share, we would love to hear that.
Oh my goodness, I have so many. I'll give you one from the Middle East to start with. It's really interesting how when I speak about values, and when any person from any country hears about this concept of values, they always say, you're looking for our best value? Well, we're the most hospitable. And literally it comes out from everyone's mouth. Like anyone Middle Eastern, they think they're the most hospitable. Anyone Asian thinks they're the most hospitable. Latinos think they're the most hospitable. And indeed, everyone is really hospitable. But there's this one story from the Quran, I think, where I think this old lady, maybe Prophet Muhammad or somebody, stopped at this lady's house, and she, without any question, not even asking their name, just housed them and looked after them for 3 days. And after 3 days, kind of sat down and said, tell me your story. What's going on? How are you? What, how come you landed on my door? And then it continues. And I feel as though that power of kindness, especially from strangers, especially from women who are often the gatekeepers of the house, right? They control often the keys, the finances, everything that happens in the home. They decide who comes in, who comes out, really. I cannot tell you how often I have been embraced as a sister, a niece, a daughter even. And that's really because of women seeing either themselves in me or their daughter in me, or just looking after me as if I was one of them. And often we talk about how women are our own worst enemies, like, that we don't necessarily support each other, etc. My experience has been the exact opposite. My experience has been that it's women who have held out the ladder, who have sent the elevator up, who have said, hey, did you know about this? Or why don't, you know, or just have been giving time and time and time again. I mean, I could give you another quick example from me. When my children were small, I remember I only had my firstborn, and I had a 6-month-old, and I was already 3 months pregnant. And the reason the Philippines has the value of family is because it really felt that everyone looked after my little baby as they saw me struggling and waddling around as if my baby was their own. And they'd play with him, they'd feed him, they'd nurture, look up. It was just incredible. It's often women who create that sense of family. So yeah, I just have so many examples of the power of women, just so many. I could happily create communities around the power of women in each and every single country. They have a unique way of expressing. For example, in Brazil, they're able to really own their bodies. It doesn't matter if they're fat or if they're skinny or if they're bumpy or if they're smooth, whatever be their body. In Rio, you just wear your bikini and go out. But it's not just in Rio, it's all over Brazil. It's not just in Brazil, it's a lot in Latin America. But, you know, the idea of just celebrate yourself, enjoy your body. I remember just feeling like that sense of loving oneself and another was really profound. It was profoundly expressed vis-a-vis some other parts of the country where, you know, you hide yourself or you shroud yourself or you have to. It was the exact opposite. It was a real sense of love and embrace oneself. That'd be another example. Like I said, so many examples. Very good question.
Thank you, Dr. Mandeep. In that essence, how can we come together? Because at G20 this year, with the Digital Power of Women Conference, we are showcasing the female perspective in policy recommendations towards the G20 leaders. In that sense, how can we all come together for each other to really create a safe, secure experience for all, guided by values? What wisdom do you have to share for us to use using the value compass to come together?
Well, I truly believe the title, what 101 countries teach us about purpose, life, and leadership. I truly believe that if we think about what our purpose is, and we all have one common purpose, we all have a womb, right? So we all have the capacity, potential capacity to create and to nurture and to look after. That's not to say everyone needs to be a mother, but that's to say that there's this sense of if you find your purpose, and I guess if I step back, when you are able to do a short exercise and figure out your values, your purpose kind of drops out of those values. And when you have found your purpose, it is profound how you engage with life. You see all over the world, people will give and give to their children, almost like without thinking about it. They spend much more on their children than they ever would do for themselves. And then imagine if you're able to think about your purpose, life, and leadership, if you're able to think about what's the legacy you want to leave? How do you want to lead? What's the role model you wish to be? There's a way of supporting other people in terms of being a mentor, but there's also a way of supporting one another in terms of being a sponsor. Like, for me, not just to say, oh, I have a very good friend, you must meet her, but rather open the door for her, make sure she walks in, make sure there's a seat on at the table, and make sure she's part of the conversation so that she really is involved. Making sure that when you create an opportunity, you truly see it all the way through. That's part of our leadership. Life. How is it that we're going to lead our life so that it's truly, as the Dalai Lama, His Holiness, says about the book, it would lead to success, fulfillment, and happiness. When it's coming out of your fulfillment, you're able to lead others to that same fulfillment. So I truly believe that the power of values and knowing what's most important to you, what your values are, has such a profound trickle effect throughout your life, throughout the minute-by-minute decisions you make, but also the legacy you leave.
Wow, that was beautiful, Dr. Mandeep. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. And do you have any other last words of wisdom you want to share with our audience?
I would say that we cannot stay on the sidelines and say, this should happen, that should happen. I wish this existed. I wish that existed. We have to be creating it. So, for example, you've just created this. Anyone who hears this, watches this, is, it's anyone it touches, they should make sure that they connect with you, on all the platforms you're on, or the same with me, the same with the whole network that you're creating. And not just connecting on the platforms, but then what are we creating? And truly build objectives that we then fulfill.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Mandeep, for sharing your incredible wisdom. And you're such a gem. And I really value the work you have done. And I look up to you. You're such an inspiration for many around the world. And
Well, I feel the same about you, and I'm really grateful for what you're creating. I'm really grateful for this being the start of so much that's about to happen. And so thank you for taking it on. I know it's a huge mission and purpose-led project, but you've got this, and we're all with you.
thank you, Dr. Mandeep. And I think we can do this together because incredible leaders like yourself that's coming together.
Great to be part of it. Thank you so much.
Marianne Williamson is a globally known American author, speaker, and a political activist. She ran for 2024 presidential election, and we are excited to welcome Marianne Williamson to the second annual Digital Power of Women conference. Welcome, Marianne.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I want to get right to it and ask you a question in the wake of our US election. Can you explain the concept of democracy?
I think democracy is a very profound and sacred idea. And that idea is that there is within each and every one of us, all of us, an inherent wisdom. Thomas Jefferson said the only safe repository for power in the United States, he said the only safe repository for governance is in the hands of the people. It's the idea that, as our founder saw it, if you have free public education so that people's critical thought processes are honed, and you have a free press so that people really know what's going on, and you have freedom of assembly so that people can talk to each other about what's going on, that more often than not, the collective will of the people, as expressed through free elections, would be the best guidance system. And that's why it's such an issue. Because anytime you mess with any of those things, you're diminishing the power of the people to govern themselves.
Thank you, Marianne, for sharing your insights on what democracy is. With that said, given what unfolded in the United States, a lot of women feel very disheartened because they feel like they went out and voted, but it was still not enough. What do you have to say for women who actually showed up to not give up, because it's not the end of advocating for more female leaders to be in decision-making positions?
We need more than female leaders. We need more than cosmetic change. We need feminine values. Women needed to be involved a lot earlier than voting day. We needed to be involved demanding that in this contest, we bring up and we emphasize and we insist on improving, for instance, the rate of child poverty. So this idea that we showed up to vote, but who'd you show up to vote for? In this particular race, you had a woman running who did mention all those things, who did talk about the main issues and the challenges that confront most American women every day. The fact that 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. The fact that 70% of Americans live with chronic economic stress and anxiety. The fact that we're afraid that we're feeding our children breakfast cereals filled with carcinogen. The only person talking about that was a woman. And the same patriarchal system that doesn't want those things talked about was able to throw a blanket over that conversation for us to truly introduce female values. Not just women sitting at the table. It has to do with what they say when they're at the table. In order for us to do that, by definition, it's more than just getting elected. It's truly disrupting the trajectory that is now dominant. That's what we as women should be talking about, not just if we're sitting at the table. Some of the women who are sitting at that table are the exact opposite of everything I'm talking about here.
I think you really touched upon some very important key topics. Marianne, you said values, feminine values. One of the things that you mentioned is not just having a female leader at the table is not going to solve the problem. It's about having qualified leaders. That's something we need to work on as a society. So there needs to be some action taken with awareness. And I think that's the most important thing. When we're talking about female leadership, it's about the values. What values are we talking about that leader bringing to the table? What are some of the values you think is necessary for us to bring to the forefront to really revive democracy, like you said earlier?
When I was growing up, my mother used to say that a woman's primary job was taking care of her children and taking care of her home. And when my mother used to say that, I used to think, oh, she's so old-fashioned. That is so retro. And now I realize that archetypally, she was correct. It's just that today, we have to realize that means everybody's child. And it has to mean the home that we share, which is the earth itself. So I think that our attention needs to be much less on, we got to get women in power, and more asking ourselves, what is power for? What is the purpose of power? And if we are coming from there, we will have the psychological and emotional heft to make it happen because we are standing for something. So 4 factors are, number 1, greater economic opportunity for women. Number 2, greater educational opportunity for children. Number 3, a reduction of violence against women. And number 4, the reduction of unnecessary human despair. These are the kinds of things that should have been part of a robust conversation in this presidential campaign. And that is exactly the kind of conversation that the system itself sought to suppress. So you can't talk about changing the society without repairing people's lives.
Yes. I think this is great. Marianne, what can we do better to actually support female leaders? Because it is not the best situation right now.
You know, in the 1970s, I was a young woman, and the feminism of that time was all the rage and the conversation, that wave of feminism. And it was understood that without sisterhood, none of this was going to work. That if we didn't support other women, that none of us were going to get there unless every woman got there. And these days, I don't hear the word sisterhood enough within the larger conversation about women.
I love it. I love it. And I also love something else you said earlier. So it's about women not just getting to the table, it's about getting to the table and opening up more seats.
This is what we need to do. Make sure there are women to your right and to your left who will be there with you. Now, there are many corporate boardrooms in the United States, especially, that's a big one. If you're talking about feminine values and what that does to the children, or chemicals and pesticides that harm a child's brain. Okay. If that woman speaks up like that, the thing to expect is that there will be an awkward silence at the table. So what would normally happen is there will be an awkward silence, and then after that, people will just ignore her and go on. This study was talking about the fact if even one person, definitely a man would be helpful because the system has to acknowledge, but I think even another woman at this point will say, actually, I agree with her. I think we ought to have that conversation. The cat's out of the bag. And that's what's so important. Speak up for other women. When other women say what aligns with your heart, use your voice. Use your voice on her behalf.
Thank you. Thank you, Marianne. And you know, speaking on this subject, a lot of women do feel, most women around the world, at some point in their life feel like, yeah, they were not in the club, like you said, or they were not given a fair chance. Actually, a majority of women have felt it at least once in their life. This is the reality. We all actually share that. How can we take, instead of getting angry and going at it, how can we really channel this energy to be really, again, even though if it might be just the word solidarity, but really look around us, look at our friends, our mothers, the fathers, the brothers, really use this feeling inside to do something to change. And what are some words of wisdom out of peace you can share?
I never felt dismissed as a woman in any of my career path before politics. But I certainly know what it's like now. But once again, the answer is sisterhood. It's the system that dismisses us. It's a patriarchal system that dismisses us. But so much of that patriarchy has been internalized. That's why the response to your question is sisterhood. So we must gather as women, because if we feel called, those of us who feel called to go out there, if you start getting successful, standing on what you really believe, the patriarchy will come after you. And you will hit that place. Do I go along to get along? Or do I say no? And you will need women around you. But I think sisterhood really says it. It's not just transactional. It's I am with you when you hurt. Because if you do this, there will be days, no matter what it is, if you really seek to take on a dominator model, a patriarchal system, a system that is literally destroying the planet and killing our children, there will be tough days. But to a woman, shaming, and you will need other women to hold your head while you cry. And there will be equality. You'll need men holding you while you cry too. But a woman holding you while you cry it's the arms around you of someone who herself understands at a level that no man probably can.
Wow. You know, I got goosebumps when you said that. And it truly is a different type of power a woman can have, sisterhood. Thank you. That was amazing. Thank you, Marianne. I think we did an incredible interview, and we have